Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Muhi Khwaja with the American Muslim Community Foundation, and today on the Muslim Philanthropy Podcast, we have with us Abbas Rattani. He is the co-founder of Mipsterz. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So tell everybody where you're located.
I'm currently in Louisville, Kentucky, the up and coming art scene of the South, as they call it. I'm not sure if they actually call it that, but I'm calling it that.
Well, if there's any indication of just kind of foresight, I think you, as a founder of Mipsters, have that. So I think that it is safe to call Louisville the art scene of the South.
The up and coming art scene, because we
Yes,
have to include Austin, Texas. They're already established art scene.
for sure, for sure. So obviously, like the hometown of Muhammad Ali, there's a lot of history there. But tell us a little bit more about yourself, your upbringing, where you grew up, and all those fine details.
So I grew up in Queens, New York. I spent a good portion of my childhood out there, and then I moved to Fayetteville, North Carolina. I actually went to J. Cole's rival high school, the time when J. Cole was in school, and then finished high school as a 16-year-old. Ended up going to college at the University of North Carolina. Fell in love with Islamic studies. Went to growing up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I moved there actually a year after 9/11. It's home to Fort Bragg Military Base. Everybody there was either affiliated with the military or their family was actually in the military. And I was the only one, out there, no military affiliation. And so it was hard, growing up as the only Muslim in that town. Specifically, it was Hope Mills. It's smaller than Fayetteville, but people recognize Fayetteville. And when I went to college as a 16-year-old, wide-eyed, ready, to take on the world. A lot of my Islam at the time was coming from like random websites, like Wahhabist websites, and that was the
Yeah.
only thing that was really readily available. And when I took Islamic studies courses for the first time, I was blessed to have folks like Omid Safi, Carl Ernst as professors. And then the MSA was the complete opposite. I mean, they didn't really
Hmm.
accept me. It was a lot of ostracization. A lot of my views and ideas didn't fit in. I mean, UNC is a state university. So a lot of the kids who were, there actually knew each other from, living in Raleigh, Durham, Cary, Chapel Hill. And so they all went to the same mosque. And it was very cliquish. And I think those feelings of alienation plus my development as an artist, as a creative, but then also falling in love with like some of the Gnostic, mystical branches of Islam. I majored in religious studies with a focus on Islamic studies, and I had a big interest in ethics and philosophy from the Muslim perspective. And it just like I didn't really have a home outside of academia, and I think from there I ended up studying ethics more formally. Ended up working and studying and continue to do a lot of research within the Islamic philosophy, Islamic ethics sector. But ultimately, that took me to New York City, where Mipsters happened as a huge accident.
Wonderful. Would love to tell everybody what is a Mipster and how did the organization come to form?
Well, for the longest time, I thought people hated me because I was Muslim, but it turned out they hated me because I was a hipster. So that's kind of where hipster came
They
about.
had now they have two reasons to hate you. We'll just
Yeah,
call it that.
exactly.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I thought it was because I'm a Muslim. No, it's not. So it was an identity that we say it very tongue in cheek, and the way it came about, to be honest, I went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania. They're home to Wharton Business School. So a lot of Muslim friends of mine went to Wharton Business School. They were all really into being businessmen and women. And when I moved to New York City to start my career as a comedian, as a stand-up comic, um, it was 2012 Ramadan, and again, I found myself in another position, looking for community, looking for fellow Muslims, and some of my Wharton Muslim friends would invite me to events, these like Muslim young professional events. And unfortunately, when you're having dinner in Manhattan or in New York City, period, you can spend up to like $50 a person. And so I'd get invited to these iftars where the entry fee was $50,
Mm,
possibly to no fault of their own, because the food and space in Manhattan is very expensive. Um, I kind of felt like this is not this became another space where I didn't feel home. I come from a very poor part of Queens, New York called Elmhurst. Many people know about Elmhurst because it was like COVID ground zero in New York City this past year. And, you know, my dad, puts food on an airplane. I don't come from a wealthy background, and I was a struggling comic. So I made the wrong life decision of studying philosophy in the first place, and then trying to be a stand-up comic. And so I found myself trying to connect with other communities, and then places that were giving away free iftar was like, the Albanian mosque at the bottom of a grocery store or the Bangladeshi mosque in the back of a bodega. And I was like, man, I don't really fit in with these folks either. And so a few of my artist friends who were visiting from Boston, who were visiting from California during Ramadan, it was the summer. We started meeting up and having iftar together, and we started doing it at the same exact date and times as some of these young professional events to provide an alternative to other creative Muslims looking to, hang out with folks their age with common interests. And we thought, if there's a Muslim business group, there's a Muslim young professionals group, there's a Muslim doctors group, let's learn from what's happening in Zagati Park, 2011 Occupy Wall Street, and be the opposite of that, and be the hipsters, be the Muslim hipsters who occupy this corporate capitalistic framework of for
hmm
me at the time, and even now as somebody who studied philosophy, I don't believe capitalism is in harmony with an Islamic conception of like distributive justice, or restorative justice. And so at that time, I was like, you know what? Let's occupy these Muslim young professional, Muslim capitalist organizations and become like Muslim hipsters. It didn't mean to be anything more than just a tongue-in-cheek commentary. But when Ramadan ended, those Muslim creatives, now at that point it was like 100, 200 Muslim creatives all over New York City were just like, oh, this can't end. Like,
Wow.
we have to keep meeting up. We have to keep like playing music together. We have to make films together. We have to do things together. And I was like, hey, that's not really my, interest or desire. I'm trying to be a stand-up comic, and now you've put me in a position where I have to organize events and do community building and things like that. And I was like, no, man, I've never really found a community. I don't really know what the first thing of community building is. I never really had a sense of belonging. So how can you put me in charge of being the event organizer, the community organizer? And I think with just like many years with just constant support, enthusiasm, Mipsterz kind of took off. And partially was because one of our first early projects was the Mipsterz Summer in America film that went viral. I mean, we just
hmm
basically got all of her friends together. Layla Shakely, man, she's a boss, dude. She's so awesome. Her sister, her whole family, and her friends. And I went to when I was at UNC. Ibtihaj Muhammad was a student at Duke University. We went to Lupe Fiasco concert, and we stayed in touch. And I was like, we're making this film. Everybody, let's get together. Just showcase who we are in the day to day. And I think that, in a way, signals to a lot of Muslims around the world who are of the millennial generation, who are in their early 20s at that time, that there's another community out there, there's another interpretation, there's another sense of Muslim identity that they all resonated with in their heart of hearts, but now it came to
Right.
fruition in a visible way, and something that they can actually see in a concrete kind of way.
Yeah, it's almost like having that hunger and desire to build community, but doing it from a very particular lens, right? Not necessarily like an ethnic lens or a professional lens, but just a creative lens, like you were saying. And I think that although maybe that wasn't your outset of like what you wanted to create, but it is beautiful to see the trajectory of that, of what has been done through that initial meeting of just getting together with a few people. So kudos to you on that journey, and it's been exciting to see the work, and I've been a fan of all of the projects that I've seen come out of Mipsterz. So it continues to blow my mind in terms of like just the artistic expression that is within the Muslim community. And I'm glad that you do it with that lens of being Muslim, but not necessarily limiting yourself by that as well. Because I think that you guys are artists and creatives, regardless of your faith identity, but coming together to showcase the beauty of what your faith has to offer. Um, so
Yeah,
I've been really impressed with it.
I think two of the most beautiful things that popped out of this was, you know, people who grew up in Los Angeles, New York City, Boston, these huge cities had access to a Muslim community. And I remember when I was growing up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, I had nobody. You know, there wasn't really a Muslim community out there that of people my age. Maybe one or two Muslims that I can think of, but they may hung out with their families and went to Cary, went to Raleigh, and I didn't have really a form of transportation to do that. And so when Summer in America came out, we had Muslim parents contact us and say, "Hey, my daughter is in high school and she's always been embarrassed about wearing hijab and self-conscious, and this film just gave us a sense of pride, it gave us a sense of validation because her non-Muslim friends are championing the video.
Yeah,
Her non-Muslim friends are like, "Oh my gosh, have
I
you seen
love
this
that.
video? It's amazing. Oh my god," you know. And then and then we were hearing from Muslims, sorry, non-Muslims from around the world, being like, "Hey, is it weird if I call myself a Mipster? I'm not Muslim or anything, but I'd like to call myself." And I was like, "Hey, man, if you're associating Islam and Muslim as something as an identity you want to take on, you know, and if you remember this time period, I mean, this is like the height of ISIS, Al Qaeda, all up in the news and shit, and so." I don't know if you know, I apologize to all. This is a
You
PG-13
said it. It's
podcast here,
fine.
but you
Yeah.
know, all of this stuff is yeah, yeah. All of this stuff is in the news, and for non-Muslims to be like, "I want to be Muslim. I love this Muslim identity." To me, I was like, man, all it really took was for us to be ourselves and to have shine, and not find ourselves in a position of constantly responding to the vitriol, the harassment, the oppression, the hegemony around us. Anytime something happened, you know, everybody has this feeling, you know, that,
Hmm.
"Oh my gosh, I hope it wasn't a Muslim who didn't pay for his ice cream cone and walked out of that, you know, shop," or whatever, any small, minute thing. They'd be like, "I hope that person isn't a Muslim," because immediately CARE or ISNA or somebody has to go on the news being like, "Muslims do not accept walking out of ice cream shops without paying for the ice cream cone." You know, that's not something. And it was absurd, you know. And to your point about the beauty, you know, one of the things that really resonated with me that Omid Safi, when he was my professor as an undergrad, said to me, he said, "You know, Abbas, to power, people will submit willingly or unwillingly, but to beauty, everyone submits willingly." You know, and that really
That's
speaks
brilliant.
to some of the amazing, like, yeah, and that speaks to some of the amazing power that poetry has, that artwork has, that people, whether you're Muslim or not, could see something, and inside of them, they're like, "This is beautiful." There's no convincing necessary. There's no, you know, have to force you to submit. You are already in submission to how beautiful something is, inherent to your being as a human. And I think with Mipsters, we were always just interested in creating works that spoke to us, that resonated with us as individuals. And we knew that if other people saw it, they would submit to the beauty of it willingly.
Yeah, and I think that also goes to showcase like, taking claim and charge of our own narrative, right? Like who is telling our stories for us, and to be able to have that impact of other people from outside of our faith community championing what you produce, that in and of itself is a win. And if that was the only good thing that came of this, I would say that that in and of itself was totally worth it.
Alhamdulillah, man. Alhamdulillah. I mean, every day has just been a blessing to see that every every day we think about another project and everyone's like, man, internally we're like, man, we hate this name Mipsterz, that it's stuck with us accidentally and it's pretty washed up. And let's do a barometer and test out there who's willing to work on our next project. And we're just floored every single time people are like, we want to get involved, we want to work on this thing, let's do something. And it's just been a huge blessing and also prize every day. I mean, the fact that, and this is another thing that Omid Safi said. I mean, one of the things that's promised to us in this life, the only thing that's promised to us in this life is death. So all of our breaths are numbered. And I remember whenever Omid Safi used to finish his classes, he would say, thank you for spending your finite breaths with me in this class. Because you could be
Mm,
spending that currency, aka your life, anywhere, but you were there listening. And I'm just so blessed and just humbled anytime somebody takes a second to work on a project with us, or even like view any of our work. Just like, man, alhamdulillah, you have a finite time on this earth and you decided to spend even a few seconds of it with in this space.
for sure. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other projects that Mipsters has in the pipeline, or what are the things that keep you excited about this work?
You actually hinted something about this, about the ability to control our own narrative. And whenever Mipsters puts out artwork, sometimes there is a museum space or art curator that finds our work and says, we love this work, we want to showcase it. However, those folks are oftentimes white, they're non-Muslim, and they decide for us how they want to portray our work. And oftentimes it's Orientalist, it's otherizing, and we have to force ourselves to be American Muslim or Muslim American. It's like hyphen hyphen. It's like, bro, I'm American, period. Regardless of what my religious identity is, you don't have to do qualifiers. And I think these qualifiers, you never have people who are white call themselves, oh, I'm a white Christian American. They're just American, which
Right.
highlights the level of hegemony and the control that a particular group has. And so there came a point where I got just like very fed up with these curators saying, we want to include you, but we want to include you on our terms. And if you say no, that's totally fine. But this volume on Muslim art won't include the Mipster's voice. And that's on you. And that's the other thing about being gatekeepers and controlling the narrative. If let's say a contemporary art museum puts out a volume and says, hey, this is all of the artwork around Muslim fashion. And if Mipster's is not included because of like Summer in America, then 10, 15 years or 10 generations down the line, when somebody goes back through the archive and says, what was Muslim fashion art? They'll open
Hmm.
that book and we're omitted from that because someone decided that because of the terms and conditions, we weren't agreeable because we said, no, we don't want to be portrayed in an Orientalist kind of way. So this led us to create a new project. And with this project, we said, you know what? Let's just be ourselves. Let's project ourselves or even an alternative universe. If we had the power to hit either reset button on Earth, or if we could look at a parallel universe, what would a Muslim future look like? And that's what gave birth. That initial idea gave rise to us starting to experiment with something that was very feasible, which was music. And so we had this residency at Zoo Labs in Oakland, California, and
Oh,
we brought
nice.
musicians from everywhere. And we were very
Hmm.
lucky to be in residence at the same time. Malik Yusuf, who's a 6-time Grammy Award winner. Kanye writes a lot of music with him. A lot of College Dropout, Late Registration was written by Malik Yusuf, or Malik, as he says. And he was at the same time in residency with us, and we used to just collaborate with his musicians. He would collaborate with my musicians, and he kept saying, he was like, Aki, my sons would love this. He's practicing Muslim, and he's like, my sons would love Mipsterz. My family, like, this is exactly what your generation is doing. And so we started experimenting with music that one would hear on a different planet, or in a different world, or a different reality that was a futurist kind of sound, kind of like the Afrofuturist music that emerged in the 70s and 80s, and with Janelle Monáe being the new contemporary Afrofuturist artist. We were kind of learning
Mm-hmm.
from that tradition. That then working with Sarah El Fagit, she was the creative director of Mipsterz for about 3 years, and under her direction and ideas, she said, you know what, let's think big. Let's think about the ways in which animals can also interact with human beings, and the relationship with color and iconography and fashion, and paying homage to previous generations, paying homage to other cultures around the world, that our ancestors come from. How do we bring all of that together in this future? And if you think about it, Star Wars, for example, was filmed in Turkey, in Tunisia,
Mm-hmm.
and these movies that Americans are watching and saying, this is Americana, this is American art forms, they're done in Muslim areas. And Omid Safi will be the first to tell you that Star Wars is largely based on Muslim conceptions of like good versus evil, of justice, and
Of
the
course.
thobes, they're all wearing thobes. It looks like they're all heading to Fajr prayer in the morning with their thobes and the hoods. And so it's like, you're already borrowing and appropriating from our culture. Imagine if we had license, creative license. And so that's where this Alhamdu Muslim Futurism project came about. It started off as a film, as music, as portraits, that blended fashion, that blended the colors and everything. And we've released that over Instagram. And then we applied for a grant through the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art to say, hey, we're interested in scaling this idea, and not only just limiting it to Mipster artists, but just like Muslim adjacent artists, artists who are just like, I'm not Muslim from a religious sense, but identify as Mipster. We have a lot of folks like that. It's like, let's collate and curate all of that art together. Everyone is welcome. We're not going to say, oh, you're not an artist that fits, kind of the same ways in which, uh, using this word bluntly, but white supremacists, who are just like, well, we have an idea of what Islamic art is. White supremacist doesn't have to be like the KKK or Nazis. I mean, you can have white supremacy on the liberal side of like white as perfection, white as pure. And so we would see that on the artist side or art curation side, and we were very deliberate. We're like, look, everybody is welcome. We have a very strict policy of inclusion, inclusivity, of pluralism, cosmopolitanism, which was something Ali Hassani over at Harvard was sharing with me. And Sylvia Chan Malik was one of the advisors, was very much like,
Nice.
look, you have a project that's that is about anti-black, that confronts anti-black racism, that confronts settler colonialism, nativism, sexism, homophobia, et cetera, et cetera. And then through that, as we started developing the project, what we realized, and Aisha Schillingford, she runs the Wakanda Dream Lab and Intelligent Mischief, she's another one of our advisors, was telling me that when she was working on the Wakanda Dream Lab, she would ask, Black folks, how do you conceive of a utopia? And the immediate go-to is conceiving of a utopia that's free from oppression. But when you
Mm.
push them and they said, okay, let's say there's no oppression, there's no hegemony, there's no anti-Black racism, what's next? What does a healthcare policy in Wakanda look like? What does a transportation policy or immigration policy in Wakanda look like? And she was noticing that because of minority oppression, minority disenfranchisement, marginalization, and because we've had to live like this for so long, it's so hard to take it to the next step. I got introduced to Rebecca Hankins, another one of our advisors, Hussein Rashid, and Rebecca Hankins. she's a professor, and also a librarian and just like an OG in Texas. And she does Afrofuturism, science fiction, and Islam, and she's like practicing Muslim. And she's like, there's so many futuristic science fiction elements within the Islamic tradition for generations, for centuries, that now, once we imagine a world free from oppression, how do we take it to another level and start imagining these, esoteric worlds where Muslim joy is a form of liberation. And even just thinking about this, just allowing ourselves to imagine, we're viewing this joy as a form of resistance, as a form of liberation, as a form of Muslim liberation. And we couldn't have done any of this without the developments within Afrofuturism. And one of our partners is the Center for Afrofuturist Studies, who's amazing, has been helping us develop and also learn, very closely from the Afrofuturist tradition and Afrofuturism, and how those scholars and creatives and thinkers started thinking about their worlds and their realities. Because when Afrofuturism came about, like if you think about the time course, that's the same time
Hmm.
that white folks are thinking about fantasy worlds like Star Wars, Trek, whatever. And you start seeing black versions of that adjacent or in parallel, being like, we're not going to sort of abide by this exclusionary worldview where Star Wars is just entirely a white universe, whether deliberate or inadvertent, it's what it is, what it is. And so on with the Center for Afrofuturist Studies has been very much, pushing us to think, what does Muslim futurism respond to? Who does it, who is it for? Who's included? And it's been just like a beautiful journey. And we've been, dropping stuff on our Instagram slowly. We have a website, muslimfuturism.com, where we're sharing works. And so because of that, the project keeps getting bigger and bigger. And then, budget constraints, etc. Out there, people, if you got some extra change, think about us.
Ching ching. So, as a nonprofit leader, maybe somebody who didn't necessarily think of themselves in that trajectory, but really you're leading all of this visionary work. Um, and I think I know the answer, but I want to ask it is like, what are some of the challenges that you've seen, and what advice do you have to people who want to start their own initiatives?
Let me tackle the second question, uh, because I think it's a little bit easier to answer, but I think it also stems from the challenges. The biggest advice I would give folks is whatever it is, do it. Don't think about it so much that you have just paralysis, from analysis paralysis, that as they call it, and never actually get to do it. I mean, the first
Hmm.
iteration of anything you do is not going to be something that you've envisioned in your head. And one of the biggest things that people are always, I have this conversation with a lot of younger folks all the time. They're like, man, if I just had $1 million, if I had $1 million, my vision would come through. Guaranteed, you give them $1 million, and still their vision isn't what it is, as they've imagined it in their brain. And so I just push folks, like, whatever idea you have, do it. Stay true to yourself, and try to do something that's feasible. Think about, like, as in the business or the startup world, they call it an MVP, most minimally viable product. Think of
Right.
the smallest thing that you can do that's still in line with your initial vision, as a prototype, as a sample product, and then build off of that. See who's interested in it. If that took you $5 to make, maybe somebody will be like, yo, here's $3 extra. Make the next thing. And then slowly you'll see, everything grow, pretty fast at times. The other thing is, be humble, and there's always merit in other people's ideas and criticisms. I think one of the biggest things, I've seen and I've learned is people come to me all the time and they're just like, Mipsterz sucks. And instead of, fighting back, I'm always like, oh yeah, I agree. But I have my reasons I have my reasons, but what are yours? Like, well, I want to learn from you. And they're immediately taken aback. They're like, oh man, I was just being
Right.
provocative. I was like, okay, cool. But if you do have any ideas, I want to learn from you. I want to find the merit in anybody's criticism and anybody's claim. And I think there's wisdom there
Right.
because, now when Mipsterz came about when we were in our 20s, now we're in our 30s and Gen Z is in their 20s. And Gen Z is like, dag, everything you guys are putting out is hella cringe. And I'm like, okay, we
Mm.
thought this was dope. Please explain how this was cringe. you know? And and learning from them, it really pushes us to be like, oh my gosh, like you're right. I mean, the things are shifting, the vibes are shifting. Mips has always represented, the youth. I think the ideas are with the youth. And if more mosques, for example, there's like a crisis in the mosques where they're like, there's not enough young people here. How do we get more young people? The solution is to involve younger people. I'm talking 16 to 26-year-olds on your boards. And you'll be surprised. And
Brilliant.
if you give them a microphone and actually listen to them and implement their ideas, you'll be
Yep.
very impressed with how things change. You know what I mean? And so that's the biggest advice is like, I understand, a lot of younger folks, myself included, don't want anything to do with the mosque community because there's a huge generational divide. And whenever young people suggest something, it's like, oh, can we use this space for this? Can we use this? They're like, no. But mosques that have success incorporated younger groups of people, with different ideas, they're very successful mosque communities. I mean, look at NYU. Even whenever I go to New York, I have to make a pit stop at NYU. I always see
Right.
Suhaib Webb in the prayer room, doing Snapchats. I don't know if that's the answer. Shout out Suhaib Webb, but it speaks to it speaks to the power and ideas in innovation and imagination that younger folks have. So those are the biggest advices I'd give. The challenges, as you can imagine, is what happens when you're faced with an idea that you philosophically disagree with. You know what I mean? Like at the height of this call, I said very frankly that I think capitalism is at odds with my conception of a distributive conception of justice. Now, people are listening who probably made all of their money, through capitalistic means and don't want to hear some young kid who's a philosopher artist being like, F capitalism. That's offensive because now it's them questioning their identity. Similarly, we're posed with ideas that, what do you do when somebody says, hey, we should include all Muslim artists, but oh, Shia, Ismaili, Ahmadis, they're not Muslims, so we shouldn't include them. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? How do you say, okay, how do I find the merit in what you're proposing, but at the same time navigate such that I don't shoo you away, that I box you out, but
Right.
also
Right.
open up your mind to highlight that Ismailis are foundational to our conception of Islam. Ahmadis are foundational. I mean, and allowing space for that requires a lot of education. And I think
Hmm.
I've been fortunate and blessed that because I studied Islamic studies at UNC, and at that time UNC was like one of the top Islamic studies programs in the country. I developed all of these friendships with a bunch of like my TAs. And one of the advisors, Zara Ayubi, who's a professor at Dartmouth, who does a lot of work around gender justice and morality, I'm always asking her questions. I'm always picking her brain, like, okay, how do you reconcile this within the tradition? How do you think about these things? I'm calling up Omid Safi. I'm like, Omid John, like, how are you thinking about this in terms of a justice perspective, an Islamic justice perspective? And having that sense to know where your limits are can
Hmm.
help open doors as you deal with these problems. And I think to be honest, that's been the biggest challenge is how do you find merit in ideas that immediately just turn you off, and how do you keep an open mind, and how do you include everyone, especially folks who are having a hard time initially finding the human connection across everybody, and I want to move away from this. um, I think society, MIA has this great song called Borders, and the entire song is she's just saying, Borders, what's up with that? And then she goes down this laundry list of things and just adds what's up with that, what's up with that, to highlight the social constructionism of our entire world. I mean, these are all arbitrary boundaries that humans have created. Why do we have borders? Why are you invested in the dark arts of deciding who is Muslim or not, or even the darker arts of deciding who is a human being and who is not. And I'm trying to interface with folks and get them out of the dark arts. And anybody who's read Harry Potter knows, Voldemort, arts no good. And so I think that's been really the biggest challenge is shining the light, keeping the faith. Um,
Hmm.
and the second thing is this: people have a a interesting monolithic conception of Islam. And on one hand, you have people who grew up in abusive homes, who were Muslim culturally, and as they grow up, they form a resentment towards Islam. But it's a particular definition of Islam that they have come up with based on their upbringing. And then when they interface with other Muslims, they're like, you're not Muslim. The Muslim and Islam I'm familiar with is abusive. And as a result, you have to be able to shine the beauty and highlight, look, I'm not in any way underplaying or downcasting somebody's, upbringing or experience, right? But at the same time, I'm trying to also say, wait a minute, you cannot, we shouldn't conflate religious identity with actual abuse and trauma. And I think we need to confront abuse and trauma within our communities. But the
Of course.
conflation really prevents us from seeing the light and even dealing with abuse and trauma. And in my own family, growing up with folks who have very negative views about Islam, and seeing my dad, quiet, introverted, humble guy, practicing Muslim, was an inspiration for me. And then I have other members in my family who have traumatic experiences with Islam. And I think it's taken them the example of my dad and myself to then be like, oh, wait a minute, it's not Islam. It was my upbringing. It was my parents who were
Right.
restrictive, because my uncle and Abbas are follow the same religion as me in the same community, and they have vastly different experiences. And I think um, Muslims need to also be conscious, and even non-Muslims need to be conscious of how we try to define and block and box Islam into one particular definition. I mean, a lot of Muslims get upset with me for saying that I really believe anybody is Muslim as long as they self identify as Muslim. Like I said, I'm not involved in the dark arts of defining who is or who isn't Muslim. I'm not in that business. And
Right.
I don't think any Muslim should be. And I think it's very important that folks expand their minds and say, look, we're all human beings at the end of the day. We are whatever we say we are, and we don't have to like test anybody or have anybody prove their worth or value as a human being.
Right. I mean, the Shahada is the Shahada for a reason, right? If somebody claims that they believe in God and they believe that the Prophet Muhammad is a final messenger, who are we to say otherwise? If their actions speak in accordance to Islam as well, right? You can't be like killing people and then be like, la ilaha illallah. But I feel like at the same time, if you want to seek the truth and work towards the truth, and you have an understanding of what the truth is, and you feel aligned with what Islam teaches, then I think that's the beauty of it. Um, so I want to
But
take
even the
this.
phrasing, so I would
Yeah.
just I would push you. Oh, I would just push you. The Islam teaches, that's sometimes, even it seems subtle, right? It even seems very subtle. Even the intentionality, I think, is good, right? But I think even the language of like what Islam teaches can sometimes trigger ideas in people's minds of, oh, I think I kind of know what Muhi thinks Islam teaches. And I think that's where I even try to avoid like complete anthropomorphization of Islam, and they're like, oh, Islam says or Islam teaches. It's like, Islam not necessarily a person, unless common Bengali last name is Islam. Unless we're talking about that person, then I try to stay away from
Yeah.
like I try to stay away from Islam teaches or Islam says, and I say, listen, these are the source materials. Like, here's the Quran, here's the Masnavi, here's the Najul Bulaga. Like, read it. How do you feel? What do you think? Engage with your fellow Muslims, right? And we can talk about this later, but even this notion of like conversion or reversion, I'm like, does it have to really be that dramatic of a wording? Why can't we be like, we're just adopting this worldview and thinking about it, and human beings are in flux, human beings are transient, and we have to think about ourselves in those transcendental ways. But anyway, we're departing from Mipsterz, but it's a reflection of how I go into this. It's a reflection of how I go into Mipsterz. It's everybody welcome, whether you identify as Muslim or not, whether you identify as Mipster or not. But let's tap into our cultural like beauty that's in our hearts and create something, bring it out without shame, with some vulnerability, and
Yeah.
through that, let people's Islam or people's conception of Islam speak for themselves. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail.
No, not at all. And I love the clarification and definitely wholeheartedly agree with everything that you said. Um, I want to give you an opportunity to maybe share anything that you haven't been able to state about Mipsters before we wrap up as well.
Yeah, I mean, most important thing is things live on because people have a memory of it and people are deliberate about its preservation. And if there is anything that Mipsters has put out or other Muslim creatives have put out that resonate with you, I strongly recommend you share it and keep sharing it and share it every year on a regular basis. I mean, sharing is one, caring. It shows care of the artwork and works that person created with all of their heart and all of their time. But it also shows caring to the people around you, or where you say, hey, check this out. What do you think about this? And you're interfacing with people. And in this world of social media, sometimes people, consume stuff passively. They don't take a second to think about how much time and effort some, low income creatives, you know, put their hard work and effort to make something, who are just trying to see if it resonates with you. And sharing is also free, and social media is free. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything to put, an endorsement or to comment or whatever. And I know everybody's tired of hearing share, like, comment, subscribe, but to be honest, the way in which the world has morphed is that's a form of preservation. That's our form today of preservation and highlighting that this is of value, of this work is of meaning. And I think views is the way in which people will go back and say, what are the most influential works of the 2000 era? People will be like, oh yeah, Gangnam Style. Why is Gangnam Style one of the most influential works? Because of the views. It's because other human beings have said this work is worth preserving. It is a representation of this time period. Ironically, Gangnam Style came out in 2012 when Mipsters was born. So I and you know that's the thing I want out there is I don't necessarily need love money is great, new projects, but what's most important is an acknowledgement from anybody who's seen it that the work that we're making is of value to other human beings.
Beautifully said, Abbas. And you can find their work at mipsters.com, Mipsterz, on Instagram, Mipsters Official, on Twitter, Mipsters. I'm going to go share and like and everything Mipsters right now. So, Abbas, it's been really great just having an opportunity to hear from you directly about the wonderful work and the vision behind it. Thank you for spending time with us, your finite time, as Professor Safi would say. And, keep doing amazing things. And you have the support of AMCF. We're always happy and honored to showcase different nonprofits. You can check out our nonprofit directory. We've done other podcasts with other organizations. So we really hope that, some of our families will also fund the work of Mipsterz, and we hope that we can build a continued relationship to help with your leadership development and capacity building so that you can continue to put out this creative work.
Muhi, I'm proud of you, man. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for dedicating your time to this. I mean, you could be out here, Wall Street, making millions and billions of dollars, but you are really focused on the community and developing the
Thank you.
community and developing our voice. And
Appreciate it.
before this podcast began, you shared a little bit about where the idea of AMCF came about, and I love that it's deliberate and that you're putting shine on the Muslim name and the shine on our community. And kudos to and this work that you're doing. Honestly, man, good.
Alhamdulillah.
It requires heart and it requires courage, and that's reflected in this work.
I appreciate it. I'm much happier giving away the millions than making them. So we're committed to that. Inshallah. Take care and Alhamdulillah. Yes, yes. All right, man. Take it easy.
Salam.